Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391, getting updates to the forecast through that means as well, or email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Taking a look now at the advisories that we have out, we'll start up north along the northeastern part of the Arctic coastline. We do have winter weather advisories out for mixed type precip, and that's going to include that northeastern part of the Brooks Range as well. These are all out until 6 a.m. on Thursday morning. There will be some snow and a chance for some freezing precipitation. So if that falls on any areas of travel, be mindful that that could make things extra slick with that ice. And as we move down to the southeastern portion of the Brooks Range, we are looking at a winter weather advisory for snow that is going to be out until noon on Thursday. We are going to see amounts of 4 to 8 inches, with some of the areas at higher elevations getting as much as 12 inches of new snow. Then down in the Alaska Range, we do have wind advisories out, with winds that could gust as high as 65 miles per hour, strongest through the passes, and those are going to be out until 6 a.m. on Thursday. Take a quick look now at the satellite imagery to see some of the systems causing some of this weather. We'll start off with the system pushing up the west coast of the state, bringing cloud cover into western portions of the mainland and pushing some of that cloud cover also out over eastern locations and up along the Arctic coastline. We have another system riding up from the south headed towards Kodiak Island area, bringing in some more precipitation and another fetch of warmer air from the south through the Gulf and into the southern portions of the mainland. As we look out over the Bering Sea, we have a weaker low moving up into areas around St. Matthew Island, and bringing some cloud cover and precipitation to the area. And then finally, way out west, we do have another frontal system stretching out that's starting to make its way closer and closer to the central and western Aleutians. So as we look here, we can see for today, we do have that frontal system pushing towards the central Aleutians, starting to bring some rain with some of the warmer air coming up with this system. And then as we move further to the east, continuing to see that southerly flow all throughout the Aleutians of the Alaska Peninsula and into the Gulf of Alaska, bringing up warmer air from the south that's starting to transition over a lot of our precipitation to rain. And that includes the Alaska Peninsula up to the Pribilof Islands, southwest Alaska, into portions of the interior throughout much of south central Alaska, and then into the Panhandle as well, to the central and northern portions of the Panhandle, expecting to see rain for the remainder of the day. Some of the higher elevations around south central are expected to see primarily snow, with more of the low-lying areas expecting to see the rain. That's going to be true in much of the interior, especially as we get closer towards the Seward Peninsula and into the Brooks Range. Higher elevations still going to be primarily snow, but we are warm enough to see a lot of rain mixed in with some of these areas where we are going to see snow at the low-lying areas. Then along the Arctic coastline, again, we do want to point out that we will have a chance for some frozen or freezing rain up there in that kind of easterly portion of the Arctic coastline and northeast portion of the Brooks Range. Then as we move into tonight, we're going to continue to see a fairly similar pattern up on the Arctic coastline. Most areas are going to see snow, but that eastern location where the low pressure has moved now, we are going to see the chance for some of the freezing precipitation. And then as we get to higher elevations in the Brooks Range, primarily snow. Much of the interior, we're going to see the mix of rain and snow, with some areas in the central and eastern interior going to mix with fog as well. Down the west coast of the state, Kotzebue Sound area, primarily snow, but as we drop down into the Norton Sound area and further south, we are expecting that to be a mix of rain and snow. Snow expected for St. Lawrence Island, down by Nunavik Island as well, but as we drop down into the Bristol Bay area, warm enough with that continued southerly flow to see primarily rain, and then rain for the Alaska Peninsula. And down through much of south central Alaska along the coast and other areas near the water, we are going to see primarily rain tonight. But as we get to higher elevations and more interior locations, a mix of rain and snow is expected. Down in southeast, we are going to see central and northern locations still seeing primarily rain, some of the higher elevations mixing with snow, especially overnight. And then as we move way out to the west, our frontal system now pushing through the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, continuing to bring that fetch of warmer air from the south, bringing more rain to all of the Aleutians. As we move into Thursday, that frontal system is going to push into the central portions of the Bering, extending out over the Pribilof Islands and bringing rain through the area. Continued rain for all of the Aleutians and into the Alaska Peninsula, with that southerly flow continuing to bring enough warm air for rain to much of the Bristol Bay area and up into the Kuskokwim Delta. A little bit further north, holding on to some of the colder air, a mix of rain and snow is expected for the Yukon Delta and through the Seward Peninsula, and still going to see snow for St. Lawrence Island. But as we move out into the interior, we are going to see things transition over to rain with the warmer air coming up, moving up through the Kuskokwim Valley, up into the Yukon Valley as well. Going to see primarily rain with some areas of fog in the interior, mix of rain and snow for some of the southeastern portions of the interior, and as we get by the Alaska Range. And then as we get further to the north into the Brooks Range, a mix of rain and snow is expected. And then finally, we're going to see some snow along the coastline Thursday. Down in south central Alaska, primarily rain, a little bit lighter than it was overnight tonight. And then we are going to see rain extend out through all of the Panhandle now, stretching down to the southern portions as well, and continuing to see some snow at some of the more interior locations and up at the higher elevations. And as we move into Friday, things are going to clear up in the Panhandle with the high pressure out over the Gulf, finally dominating the area, keeping the precip at bay. However, we are going to have some lingering showers around south central Alaska, primarily rain and primarily near the coastlines. As we get into the Alaska Range, going to be a mix of rain and snow. And we are still going to have the warmer air holding on in the interior portions of the state, going to see primarily rain throughout the interior. But as we get further to the west, mix of rain and snow is expected as we get closer towards Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound area. However, further to the south, we're going to see that southerly winds coming up behind the troughing from our low that is now in the southwestern portions of the Bering. Continue to bring that southerly winds up all along the west coast and through most of the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, bringing rain to most of these locations. Still bringing rain to the western Aleutians as well, even though they're starting to tap into the northerly flow, starting to pull back down some of that colder air. Not quite enough to get to the rain-snow mix at this point on Friday. As we move up into the northern portions of the state, mainland Alaska area, we are going to see some snow along the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coastline. Taking a look at our temperatures for Thursday morning, let's start off in southeast Alaska. Temperatures dropping down to right around 40 degrees for those lows. And then as we move into south central Alaska, dropping down to the mid to upper 30s. A little bit warmer there, Kodiak, dropping down to 42 degrees. In the interior portions of the state, mid-30s, a little bit warmer in eastern locations. We are going to see temperatures dropping down to just around 40 degrees with 40 at Delta Junction. Then as we move up into the Brooks Range, into the 20s, and then along the Arctic coastline, warmer out east, going to see temperatures drop down to the mid to lower 20s. And as we move out to the west, temperatures dropping down into the teens. Kotzebue Sound area, mid-20s are expected, and then lower 30s for the Norton Sound area, with Gamble dropping down to 31 degrees. Down into southeast or southwest Alaska, temperatures dropping down throughout the area to the mid-30s. Then for the Alaska Peninsula, temperatures dropping down to right around 40 degrees. That's going to continue through the Aleutians, with the exception at Shimei, a little bit colder, 36 degrees expected low. Moving into Thursday afternoon, staying out in the Aleutians, we are going to see temperatures rising up into the mid to upper 40s. Most locations, again, a little bit colder at Shimei, only getting up to around 40 degrees. In the Bristol Bay area, temperatures getting up into the mid-40s to mid-50s. Warmer there at King Salmon, getting up to as high as 55 degrees Thursday afternoon. And to the YK Delta area, right around 40 degrees to the mid-40s. Warmest there at Antioch, getting up to 47 degrees. In the Seward Peninsula area, we're going to see the mid-30s extending out through much of the Brooks Range as well. But then as we get along the Arctic coastline, temperatures only getting up into the lower 20s for western locations, and then right around 30 degrees for the more eastern locations. Into interior portions of the state, mid-40s are expected until we get way out to the east, where we're going to see temperatures in the lower 50s. Down in south central Alaska, mid to upper 40s most locations. A little bit warmer for Copper River Basin and Valdez areas, getting up into the lower 50s. And then down in southeast Alaska, getting up to right around 50 degrees. Friday morning lows dropping down into the lower 40s for most locations in the Panhandle. Mid-30s for most locations in south central, 28 degrees for Glen Allen, a little bit colder there. In the interior portions of the state, lower 30s are expected. Those temperatures are going to increase as we move to the west and southwest, dropping down into the mid-30s for southwest Alaska. Up along the Arctic coastline, dropping down into the single digits for western locations, stay in the teens for the east. And then finally down in the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands, dropping down to right around 40 degrees. Afternoon highs on Friday, mid 40s for the Aleutians and Peninsula, then into the 40s for much of southwest Alaska, interior Alaska, and south central Alaska, right around 50 degrees to the lower 50s for the Panhandle, and then up along the Arctic coastline, getting up into the teens out west and into the 20s for the eastern locations, and finally Kotzebue Sound area getting up into the mid 30s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Thursday morning. Widespread IFR conditions are expected over much of the Alaska region, including the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, up the west coast, much of the interior, and the Arctic coastline. A mix of IFR and MVFR conditions are expected for south central Alaska, and then primarily IFR down in the Panhandle. Thursday afternoon, some of those conditions are going to clear up, especially in mainland Alaska and down in the Panhandle. In the southeast Alaska area, we do expect primarily MVFR conditions, and we do see a lot of MVFR conditions for mainland Alaska from south central through the interior and up along the Arctic coastline. Still some areas of IFR down the west coast of the state, and primarily IFR out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Then on Friday morning, we're expecting a lot of those IFR conditions over the Bering and Aleutians to continue, spreading further inland from the west coast to areas of the interior and some areas of south central as well. Primarily MVFR for the rest of south central and up along the Arctic coastline, and then MVFR conditions expected for the Panhandle. Friday afternoon, we are expecting conditions to clear up in the Panhandle, becoming VFR for the area. Still going to have some MVFR conditions for south central Alaska. Eastern portions of the interior should clear up to be VFR. However, as we move further to the west, conditions worsening to get to IFR as we get along the west coast of the state, and then IFR conditions along much of the Arctic coastline as well. Down in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, continuing to see IFR conditions Friday afternoon. For the passes, starting up north, AKwx Pass going to start off IFR, improve to MVFR in the afternoon. Adigan Pass also going to start off IFR, then improve to marginal conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill both starting off IFR, then improving to MVFR later in the day. Rainy Pass also starting IFR, improving to marginal conditions. Windy Pass should stay IFR throughout the day on Thursday. Isabel Pass starting off IFR, improving to MVFR. Mentastus staying marginal throughout the day on Thursday. Tanita Pass staying IFR throughout the day, as well as at Portage. And then Chilkoot and White both going to start off IFR and improve to MVFR later in the afternoon. For our surface freezing lines, we can see that we have quite a bit of warmer air coming up from the south. Surface freezing line up by the Brooks Range, then down much of the west coast out through the northern parts of the Bering Sea, with upper level freezing levels pushing in with that warmer air from the south over much of mainland Alaska, with even the 6,000 foot level making it in over southern portions of mainland Alaska and out through the Aleutians. As we look at our icing, expecting icing over much of mainland Alaska, starting off in the southwestern portions of the state, some lighter icing there between 5,000 and 8,000 feet. As we move over south central Alaska, about 6,000 feet expected, and then below 6,000 feet as we move further to the north, especially along the Arctic coastline. For our jet stream, starting off out west, weaker flow by the western Aleutians, but the strongest core of the jet over our area is going to move through the eastern Aleutians out of a southerly direction around 90 knots, then dropping down to be 70 to 80 knots over mainland Alaska out of a westerly direction, and then curving around some ridging out over the Panhandle area around 70 knots, first westerly, then becoming northerly as we move over southern portions of the Panhandle. 9,000 feet. Similar flow, we still have low pressure out by the western Aleutians, resulting in some south to southwest flow over much of the Aleutian Islands. Strongest portion of the winds is going to be by the Alaska Peninsula. 50 to 60 knots is expected out of that southwesterly direction, diminishing down to around 30 knots over the central Aleutians. Up along the southwest coastline, we are looking at winds around the 30 knot range out of that southwesterly direction, and then southerly winds 25 knots over St. Lawrence Island. Out over mainland Alaska, expecting these winds to primarily be out of a westerly direction. Starting way up along the Arctic coastline, 30 knots is expected. Then up to as high as 40 to 45 knots as we move over eastern portions of the interior and down into the south central area. Some stronger winds right off the coastline, 35 knots out of the southwest is expected over the northern portions of the Gulf. And winds dropping down quite a bit over the Panhandle area. Northern portion is going to see a little bit stronger around the 30 knot range, but then dropping down to sub 20 knots as we get to much of the central and southern portions of the Panhandle. At 3,000 feet, still weaker flow over the Panhandle area with bridging near the area. And then we are going to see that stronger core of winds in the northern part of the Gulf out of a westerly direction, 30 knots is expected. Weaker winds over much of mainland Alaska with a stronger core of winds out over the Brooks Range at a westerly direction, 35 knots. And then just off the coastline, 30 knots out of the west as well. Our strongest winds are still going to remain out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands area, with some stronger winds moving out over the eastern Aleutians out of a southerly direction. 60 knots is expected, dropping down to 35 to 40 knots as we get over the southwest coastline, and 30 knots out over the central Aleutians. For our turbulence out over much of the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, below 3,000 to 4,000 feet is expected. Then out over much of the interior, below 5,000 feet is expected, extending down into south central.
It used to be that you could only warn one person about a tornado after it had already blown down someone else's barn.
Now, on average, we're able to issue a tornado warning 15 minutes before the tornado's even there, and that wouldn't be happening without Doppler radar.
This NexRad system has reduced fatalities on the order of 45% due to tornadoes since its advent.
We have a lot more information now about storms and being able to understand how they develop, how they produce severe weather, and how that information might be used to improve warnings for our National Weather Service partners.
The lab is unique in that we serve the nation by supporting the National Weather Service in its mission to protect lives and safe property by improving the accuracy and the lead time of severe weather warnings.
We have a legacy of radar research and converting existing technology from military to weather purposes.
A recycled Doppler radar led to the development of NexRad, installed nationwide in the early 90s. It allowed forecasters to see storms like never before.
Not only did we help bring that technology to the National Weather Service and to help protect lives and property, but we have continued to upgrade that technology, keep it relevant, and keep it state-of-the-art.
Recently, a major upgrade was added. Dual polarization technology takes the radar from 2D to 3D. Forecasters now know more about what type of precipitation is falling, which is very helpful during winter storms, as well as how much rain is accumulating, resulting in better flash flood warnings. The radar can also detect and track tornadoes based on debris. Looking to the future, the National Severe Storms Lab is testing the capabilities of phased array radar. Originally used by the U.S. Navy, the antenna scans the skies electronically rather than mechanically, allowing the radar to focus on a storm.
With current technology, we get a full picture or image of what is going on within a storm every 4 to 5 minutes. So it's more like a snapshot. Whereas with phased array radar, we get that picture of what's going on in the storm every minute. So it becomes more like watching a movie. So we can do adaptive, rapid scanning on the storms that matter most, being able to provide the information that's most relevant when and where it's happening.
Another advantage of phased array radar is its multifunction capability, providing weather and air traffic information simultaneously.
Number one, it is a system that promises to replace and expand upon the existing weather surveillance radars. Secondly, to replace aging air traffic surveillance radars. And number three, it offers a potential application to meet Department of Homeland Security and defense requirements for identifying and tracking non-cooperative aircraft. With the replacement of all these various radars with a single system, the American taxpayer could realize substantial savings in cost.
You have a lot fewer radars to maintain, and the electronic capability of this also reduces maintenance costs because you do not have moving parts.
Not too long ago, the ability to predict severe weather was thought to be impossible. During the past several decades, research conducted at the National Severe Storms Lab has developed life-saving tools like Doppler radar. We've progressed from no warning of threatening weather to about a 15-minute lead time, and current research promises to extend that much further.
Our knowledge of severe storms and how they behave, and our use and ability to use the Doppler radar technology is in a lot of cases a direct result of that close working relationship, that research to operations component that we get between the National Severe Storms Laboratory and a forecast office.
That history and understanding of how these data can be used by our users and doing the research to help advance the use of radar technology, really it's what we live for, it's in our lifeblood, it's in our history.
It's now easier than ever to be a part of weather research. We just launched the mPing app for both iPhone and Android users, and it's totally free. PING, which stands for Precipitation Identification Near the Ground, is a research project by the NOAA National Severe Storms Lab and the University of Oklahoma. With the mobile app, you can send us your weather observations on the go. Are snowflakes falling on your head? Is hail hitting your car? Just select what type of precipitation is falling and press submit. It's that easy. It takes about 5 seconds and it's anonymous. Reports can then be viewed online. Our scientists will compare your report with what the radar has detected. This helps us develop new radar technologies and techniques. Download the app today, share your reports, and let's work together to make our nation weather ready. Learn more here and follow us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For Marines, we'll start off with a look at our sea ice edge. The ice edge has been continuing to push to the north with some of the warmer air that we've been seeing in that southerly flow that's been along the southwest coastline. And then we do expect continued melting of some of the Bristol Bay ice. And by a week or so from now, we do expect Cook Inlet ice to also be completely melted out. As we look at southeast Alaska on Thursday in the inside waters, southerly winds 10 to 15 knots. And then as we move to southern locations, northwesterly wind 10 knots. Out over the Gulf, west to southwest flow 10 to 15 knots with seas as high as 7 feet. Then on Friday, inside waters, northerly winds 10 to 15 knots. And then out over the Gulf, winds out of a northwest direction up north at 10 knots and then getting as high as 20 knots further to the south. Let's look over south central Alaska, out over the Gulf, southwesterly winds 10 to 15 knots. Prince William Sound, kind of the opposite there. We're seeing winds out of a northeasterly direction, 10 knots. And then south to southeast winds over Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots. On Friday, winds in Cook Inlet northeasterly, 10 knots, getting up to as high as 20 knots by Kamishak Bay, and that's going to be out of an easterly direction. Southeast winds 20 knots on the east side of the Barren Islands. And then variable winds out over the northern Gulf and Prince William Sound at 10 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, starting out east around Kodiak Island, southeast flow around 10 knots, getting up to as high as 15 knots as we get by the peninsula, and then up to 25 to 30 knots as we get further down the peninsula out of a southeasterly direction, seas as high as 9 feet on the Pacific side. On Friday, southeasterly winds 30 to 35 knots around the peninsula, seas as high as 12 feet now. Then out around Kodiak Island, southerly winds 20 knots, and then through Shelikof Strait, easterly winds 15 knots. For the Aleutian Islands, southeasterly winds 20 to 35 knots, strongest by the eastern Aleutians, and then wrapping around our ridging, becoming northeasterly by the western Aleutian Islands, 30 knots expected there. Seas as high as 13 feet, highest on the Pacific side of the eastern Aleutians. Then on Friday, southerly winds for the central and eastern Aleutians, 20 to 30 knots, again strongest by the eastern Aleutians, seas as high as 18 feet, highest on the Pacific side. And as we move out by the western Aleutians, northwesterly flow, 30 knots there with seas 12 to 15 feet. Along the west coast of the state, southeasterly winds 25 to 30 knots. As we move further to the north, winds diminishing to 15 to 20 knots and becoming more easterly. seas as high as 10 feet by the Pribilof Islands. Then on Friday, southeasterly winds all along the coastline, 22-30 knots. Again, weakest further to the north, getting higher by Nunavik Island, with seas as high as 9 feet, highest by the Pribilof Islands. Along the Arctic coastline, kind of chaotic with our wind directions. Way out by the Beaufort Sea, easterly winds 20 knots, then becoming westerly 25, then back to northeasterly 20 knots as low pressure is moving through the area, making those winds a little chaotic. Down the west coast of the state, starting off northerly around 15 knots, then becoming easterly 15 to 20 knots through the Bering Strait area. On Friday, flow along the west coast more easterly 20 to 25 knots, and then easterly winds also along the Arctic coastline 15 to 20 knots are expected. Quick recap for tonight's weather. Starting out by the Aleutian Islands, we have a frontal system pushing up from the North Pacific, bringing a long fetch of warm air and moisture to the area, bringing a lot of rain to the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Some of that warm air starting to make it into interior portions of the state as well, where we will see a mix of rain and snow. A little colder, closer towards the west coast, a lot more snow out there. And then as we get up into the Brooks Range, we are going to see a mix of rain and snow. Southeastern portions of the Brooks Range are expecting to see primarily snow, where we have a winter weather advisory out for snow. We're expecting 4 to 8 inches, with some of the higher elevations getting as high as 12 inches. Then along the Arctic coastline, primarily snow, but as we get further to the east, a mix of rain and snow is expected, where we have a winter weather advisory out for mixed precipitation that will bring some snow and the potential for some light freezing rain as well. That's going to be out until 6 a.m. on Thursday. As we move down through the state into the south central area, we are going to see a mix of rain and snow at interior locations and higher elevations, but more rain as we get by the water. And then rain for the central and northern portions of the Panhandle, where we'll see a mix as we get further to the north. As we move into Thursday, rain spreading out through all of the Panhandle area, with still some areas of snow further or in more northern locations. South central Alaska, I'm going to see some lingering rain showers and some lingering rain throughout much of southwest and western portions of the interior. A little bit heavier rain and snow as we get to central and eastern portions of the interior, and primarily snow through the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline. Down the west coast of the state, we're going to see the impacts of the southerly flow out with our frontal system moving through the central Bering Sea, seeing stronger precipitation or heavier precipitation along the west coast of the state, rain further to the south and throughout all of the Aleutian Islands, but mixing back with snow towards the Norton Sound area. For Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.